We are on Samach Gimel Amud Aleph 63a1. We've been discussing paskening in front of your teacher, which, as we saw, is Asr, and the Gemara is going to discuss in a little bit more detail how Asr, what the ramifications are. Okay, so let's begin. 63a1. The Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar, on the bottom of the second column of 63a1. Rabbi Lazar mehagronia v'Rav Acha bar Tachlifa. So these two individuals, these two Amoraim, ikla'u levei Rav Acha b'reid Rav Ika. They were visiting the home of Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, ba'asreid Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Okay, don't get back confused. There's two Rav Achas. One of them, they're visiting the home of Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, but they're in the city of Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Okay, and Rav Acha bar Yaakov was the great sage of the time, so and the great sage of the vicinity. So 63a2. So by Rav Acha b'reid Rav Ika lemevaluhu igla tilsa. Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, he had these great guests, so he wanted to make a calf which is grown 1/3 of its full size. That is seen. The Gemara constantly refers to this as the most ideal, type of calf. Icy sakina v'kamachvilahu. He brought a knife and showed it to them for inspection. Right? They, back in the day, from farm to table or whatever they call it, it was like literally backyard, from backyard to table. This was like, okay, here's the knife. We're going to slaughter it. We're going to eat it a few minutes later. Okay. Amalahu Rav Acha bar Tachliva leichush le'lasava. So Rav Acha bar Tachliva says, whoa, slow down. There is an elder in this city. There is someone, a great person, Rav Acha bar Yaakov. We shouldn't be paskening over here. So Amalahu Rav Lazar b'Agronia. So his colleague who was with him, Rav Lazar says, Hachi Amarava. We saw yesterday that Rava said, Sorba me'arabanan chazlan afshe. The rabbinic student is allowed to inspect the knife for his own use. So therefore, over here, we're not, right? We saw in the innkeeper case, it was a little more complicated. Over here, they're just eating it. So Chazi, therefore, he inspected the knife. He anish Rav Lazar me'Agronia, and yet he was punished. Asked the Gemara, but he was right. Rava did indeed say this. So what's the difference over here? Shani Hasam, it's different over here. One reason is because once they invoked his name, it's now disgraceful. It's true. In a vacuum, in reality, they would have been able to just inspect it, okay, not say anything. But once they mention him, they say, we don't have to go to him. You already have a pagam in his kavod. So it's not the classic law, but it is a pagam. It still is some diminishment of his kavod. Alternatively, Shana Rav Acha bar Yaakov de muflag. Alternatively, Rav Acha bar Yaakov, because he was an exceptional sage, he wasn't just a teacher. Therefore, there was extra respect had to be given to him, and the knife had to be shown for him. It seems from this Gemara, they weren't necessarily talmidim of this rabbi, right? This is what we're touching upon a little bit yesterday. It seems like this is but this was a leading rabbi of the shtat, of the vicinity, and therefore they have to have respect for him as well. So, right. So, while yesterday we spoke more about a Talmud in front of a Rebbe, and we're going to get back to that, or this Gemara over here seems to be talking about not paskening in the vicinity of someone else. That would also be seen as a disrespectful thing to do. Yeah.
So if you're this, Rav Acha bar Yaakov, right?
Yeah.
You can't be bothered with everybody always having to go and
Correct.
Ask you all these little
Correct.
questions. So what might be that, reminds me of the Moshe situation.
Right.
Like you got to have some sort of order. So if there's, this is how we do things in our town, and he puts it out there, and then they just refer to his reference list, then you're still...
Correct. Meaning, could he be mochel his kavod, essentially, right? Is he able to set up a situation where it's not going to be an infringement on his honor because he set up a situation? Don't worry, go to this person for knife-related questions.
Or it's more of like it is the top person, but he's given. Listen, these are the criteria to follow. That would be enough. Right?
Presumably,
their code.
I would believe so. I believe so. Yeah. So again, this last halacha is very, as I mentioned yesterday, it's not so common because nowadays we don't really have these types. Certainly in America, I should say, in other places you might. In America, in Israel as well, it's, as I mentioned yesterday, it's like a hodgepodge. But like in certain, maybe in shuls you'll have that issue. Maybe like in a particular vicinity, but typically like the rabbi of Baltimore, with all due respect to whatever, there are some tremendous rabbanim over here, tremendous nechavim, but you don't really see, it's not really like a city rav. You don't have that reality in most places in America. Okay, Amar Rava, says Rava though, Ulafrushe meisura afilu b'fanav shapir dami. All that said, that we can't pass in front of a rabbi, when it comes to preventing someone from doing something which is prohibited, these halachos don't apply. In other words, if your goal is to prevent someone from doing something prohibited, there you could speak up. We have a story which exemplifies this. Ravina Haviyasnik made Ravashi. Ravina was sitting in front of his Rebbe Ravashi, Chazil hu Gavra, and he saw a person to call Asr Lahu Lechamre Bitzinta Bishapsa. He saw a person about to tie his donkey to a palm tree on Shabbos, which is a rabbinic prohibition. We're not allowed to use a tree. We spoke about this Misach Shabbos. Rami Bekala, Ravina shouted, don't do it. The person ignored him. Amr Leile Havi Gavra Bishamta. He stepped it up a little bit and did something even more authoritative. He said, if you continue, I'm going to put cherem. Keep in mind, cherems were a lot more common back in the day. It was like a tool that was used, and it was a powerful tool. You lived in communities where it wasn't like if you were kicked out of one shul, you just go to the next shul over. Back in the day, you're kicked out of shul, you're kicked out of the community. This was a big deal, right? This was really, cherems were utilized and were effective. Amrle, so Ravina asked Rav Ashi after this whole story, was I disrespectful? Was this behavior disrespectful? Amrle, Rav Ashi answered, he quotes a pasuk from Mishlei, which says that there is no sage or wise man or advice standing against the will of Hashem. What she learns from there, whenever there is the possibility of a disgrace of Hashem's name, which is anytime an avera is done, that is a chil Hashem by definition. Ein chalkin kaval rav. We don't have to give honor to a teacher. Therefore, he said it was the right thing to do. Okay, now we get into a little bit more detail about proximity. Okay, so Amar Rav says, "B'fan of aser v'chai misa." A student who paskins in front of his teacher in his presence, he is liable to death, not bidei adam, not liable by courts, but rather punishment, divine punishment. Shelo b'fan of aser ve'en chai misa. If it's not in front of him, then it's prohibited, but he is not liable to death. Okay, so in front of him, chayav misa. Not in front of him, still aser as long as the teacher is alive, but not liable to death. Okay, ask the Gemara, shelo b'fan of lo. When it's not in front of him, he is not going to be liable to death. Is that so? Vatani, we learned in a brisa. A brisa has a whole discussion about this case. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, lo meisu b'nei Aaron, the son of Aaron did not die. Because they paskin in front of Moshe, their teacher. This past week's parsha, right? We have Moshe's nephews paskining, Nadav and Avihu. They paskined in front of their teacher. My Darush, what was the inference that they made? They made their own drasha. What was the drasha of 63a3? V'nasu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish al mizbeach. The pasuk says that the sons of Aaron have to place a fire on the mizbeach. Amru, they said to themselves, Af bisha eish yiredes min hashmayim, that even though a fire comes down from heaven on the first day of the Mishkan, a fire came down from heaven. If you're listening to the Torah reading, mitzvah havim min hadyot, they felt that there was still a mitzvah to bring a fire from ordinary sources. Okay, a big discussion about what this Gemara is talking about. It sounds like the way Tosfos understands it, it sounds very different than the way we normally assume. We normally assume the story is that they're bringing Ketores into the Kodesh HaKodashim. The way the Gemara seems to be understanding is that they're bringing a fire for the Ketores on the outside Mizbeach. Okay, which is not the simple way of the text. It also contradicts other Gemaras that interpret the story one way or another, without getting into a whole analysis of what they did wrong. One way or another, this Gemara is telling us that what they did wrong was they paskin in front of their Rebbe. Now Moshe was there and they paskin. So far, we don't have a challenge, right? Rava's question is going to be, is ultimately, even if you paskin and not in front of your Rebbe, you're still going to be, we still get Misa B'dei Shemayim. But this story is not a proof to that. Next story. V'talmud echad hayalol Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer had one student, Shahar Lach B'fanav, who paskin in front of him. Amr Rabbi Eliezer li'ima shalom ishto. Rabbi Eliezer turned to his wife, Ima Shalom, and said, Tame'ani am yotzi zesh naso. I'll be amazed if this student lives out of a full year. V'lo hotzi shnaso. And indeed, he died by the end of that year. Amr lo navi. She said, wow, I'm married to prophets. So touching, so beautiful. Amr la lo navi anechi v'lo ben navi rochi. I'm not a prophet nor the son of prophets. Elakach mikublani. I have a tradition. Kol amor alachem b'fnei rabbi chai misa. I knew paskins in front of their teacher. They are liable to death, and therefore I knew he was going to die. He did something wrong. Okay, still not the challenge. V'amr Rav Rachana, Am Rav Yochanan, and now we have Rav Rachana stating about the last story. Osatama Yehuda ben Guria Shemo. The student's name was Yehuda ben Guria. Vayarachak menu shalosh parsos, and he was 3 parsos away from Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so 3 parsos is a distance. 3 parsos is a 12. Each parsa is about 8,000 amos, 12,000, 6,000, 16,000 feet. So you do the math. 16,000 times 3, whatever. Let's say it's 12,000, whatever. It's 36,000, 40,000 feet, whatever it is. Not exactly next door. Right? They're close, but not so close. So you see, he paskined not in front of him, and yet he was punished b'dei shemayim. So how could Rava say shelo b'fan of aser? The Gemara says, you see from the story that he actually was quite distant, and nonetheless he died. Ask the Gemara, b'fan of Hava. No, Rabbi Yehuda ben Guria was actually in front of him. Ask the Gemara about Rachak ben Shlosh Parsos Kamar. The Gemara, the Rabbi Yochanan said that he was 3 parsos away. What are you talking about? So Ulitamech Shemo b'Shem Aviv Lama. So the Gemara says, okay, according to your reasoning, why does Rabbi Yochanan come along and tell us his name? Who cares? Right? We're living 2,000 years later. We're learning this Gemara. Does it matter that his name is Yehuda ben Guria? Doesn't matter. But it's like, why are we embarrassing him? Bottom line is, the story happened. He had a student. So we had a brisa. In other words, the brisa came along and was anonymous. Comes along Yochanan and says, by the way, in case you were wondering, this is his name, Shkayach. If the brisa said it, okay. But Rabbi Yochanan has come along and tell us his name later. What was he doing? Ella, Shelo Tomar Mashal Haya. It was in order to tell us that it wasn't a parable. It was telling us that it wasn't hyperbole. It really happened. In other words, what the Gemara was trying, what Rav Yochanan was coming to try to do is tell you that sometimes you can have a story in the Gemara, and it's basically trying to convey a message, but it's not really, you can understand that it's a parable, it's an exaggeration, it's conveying a message. Rav Yochanan wanted you to know this actually happened. So what does he say? He says, oh, by the way, this is his name, and he lived 3,000 and he lived 3 parsos. Now, it doesn't mean that now he's able to say that it wasn't that he was actually 3 parsos away. He was telling us where he lived. He was telling us that he lived 3 parsos away. The story itself was in front of him. So why mention 3 parsos? Wouldn't it be more logical to say he was 3 parsos away, tell us he wasn't in front of him? No. If now we're trying to say, I want to tell you the story really happened. How am I going to tell you it happened? Because his name was this and this, and he lived on 509, 54th Street. In other words, we want to be very precise about the details because Rav Yochanan wanted you to know this is not hyperbole, this is real. Right? And therefore, it makes sense now, we can understand that it's interpreted to mean not that he was actually 3 parsos away, rather he was in front of him. The 3 parsos is mentioned is tell us his address, to let you know that it's a real story. Bottom line is, we don't have a proof to say that if a person's not in front of him, you are going to be chayv. So this is, before we continue this Gemara, it's worth mentioning that there is this machlokas, it touches a little bit upon what you're saying, machlokas between the Rashba and Tosfos about when a student is 3 parsos or more away. Okay, so according to Tosfos, if a student is 3 parsos away, beyond 3 parsos, it's still prohibited. In other words, its Talmud is not allowed to paskin anywhere as long as his teacher is alive. And whereas the Rashba says, with permission of the teacher, and this kind of gets what you're saying, you'd be allowed to paskin as long as you're not in the vicinity. So to your point, and I forgot this when we brought it up. In other words, even in his vicinity, even with permission in his vicinity, still usher, but 3 parsos away, which again is not like terribly far. It's whatever. It's not right there. There it's going to be permitted, but with his permission, according to the Rashba. Fine. Now the Gemara continues and discusses the severity of paskening in front of the teacher. Amrav Chia Barabba Amrav Yochanan. Kol Amar Lach B'Fnei Rabbo Ro Lakisho Nachash. Person who paskens in front of his teacher is deserving to have a snake bite him. Shnemar, it says in Iyov, Vayan Elihu ben Barcheel Habuzi Vayomar. So Elihu, one of Iyov's friends, said, Atzayer ani liyamim. Al-Kain Zachalti. I'm young in days, therefore I was afraid. Now the term Zachalti is now going to be juxtaposed to another pasuk, a pasuk in Devarim, Uchsiv im Chamas Zochali Afar, with the venom of that slithers through the dirt. So the word Zachali is snake, and scared. Why was he scared? He was scared because he once paskin in front of a teacher, and therefore, and that term that he uses is one that is associated with a snake. In other words, since he paskin in front of a teacher, he was afraid that a snake was going to bite him. Okay, Ze'iri Amar of Chanina, and Nikra Chote, the person does so is called a sinner. Why? Remember, Belibi Tzafanti Imrasecha, Leman Lo Echat Alach. David HaMelech says, in my heart I hid your words so that I would not sit in front of you. What a strange pasuk. I hid your words. Normally, there's other pasukim where David says, I was proud, and in front of Malachim, in front of kings, I used to talk Torah. Over here he says, I was afraid. Over here he says, I hid your words, and therefore I was not a sinner. Implication is, clearly his Rebbe was still alive. Had he shared those words, had he not hid them in his heart, he would be a sinner. Okay? Now, we have a contradiction regarding David. Rav Hamnuna Rami Ksiv. Rav Hamnuna brings a contradiction. Ksiv, belibi tzafanti marsacha. I hid your words in my heart. I hid your words, which implies that David did not paskin. Uksiv, bisarti tzedek b'kal rav. And this pasuk, which I mentioned before, I proclaim judgment in a large assembly. Right? On the one hand, he boasts David that he's able to paskin in front of other people. At the same time, we have him saying that he hid, he hid his legal decisions. Lokash, no contradiction. Kam bisman she'ira ya'iri kayam. That he hid it was when his teacher Ira the Ya'iri was still alive. There he would not share because his teacher was alive. Kam bisman she'in ira ya'iri kayam. And the other pasuk which says that he did paskin publicly was after his teacher died. Okay, fine. Amar. Now we go on a bit of a tangent about his teacher. Sad tangent, tragic tangent. Amar of Abba Razav the Kohen Echad. A person who gives all his donations to a single Kohen, maybe Rav Olam brings famine to the world. Okay, so basically there are 24 matnas kahuna, different places, different karbanos, different things that have to be brought to a Kohen. And the poskim, the Meiri, and others say ideally you should give it to, you should spread the wealth, spread the love. In other words, you shouldn't be giving it all to one person. Spread your generosity. You should not be giving it to one person.
Didn't you usually give whichever family was at their time?
That is a very particular, right? So particular things that are brought during to the base of Mikdash, they're given, so they take those, granted. But then there's trumos, there's certain things with tithes which you take from your house, give it to anyone, give it to your neighbor, and you're allowed to choose who you give it to. You're allowed to choose who you give it to. However, you should spread it. You should spread it, and by not spreading it, you are going to bring famine to the world. How do we see that? Shnemar ira haya'iri hayachan leDavid. The pasuk says that the Ya'iri was a Kohen to David. Ask the Gemara, leDavid hu dahave Kohen. Was he a Kohen only to David? L'chuli amalo. What do you mean he was a Kohen to David? No one else. He wasn't a Kohen to David. Kohen's an objective status. Eloshi Meshager Lamanosav. Rather, David would send Ira all of his donations. Uchsebasrei. The pasuk after that says, "Vayhi ra'ab b'mei David." There was a famine during the times of David. Okay, so again, it's important that we share, or we don't give all our tzedakah to one source. We want to give to many. Okay, or Eliezer Omer, another punishment for someone who does so. Maridin or something do lasso. Well, this person is lowered from his level of greatness. Shnemar, it says, "V'yomer Elazar haKohen Elanshi Etzava." Elazar the Kohen said to the men of the army. Okay, so Elazar addresses the people going into war. However, this is in Devarim. This is in Bamidbar, excuse me, and Moshe Rabbeinu is still alive, and Elazar is the one who's teaching the army the different halachos of going into war. And even though Elazar told them before speaking, he says, by the way, these halachos that I'm about to teach you, says Elazar the Kohen. Elazar, again, Aaron dies, Elazar takes over. Elazar now is addressing the army and giving them different instructions about going into war. He says, God did not speak to me. God spoke to Moshe. Moshe's the man. He told this to me, I'm teaching it to you. And even though he did that, which was a deferential act, a way of showing that ultimately Moshe, he's showing that Moshe is really the one in charge, afilu hachiyanish, nonetheless he was punished. It says that Yeshua shall stand in front of Elazar the Kohen when Hashem tells Moshe what is going to take place when Yeshua takes over. If you read closely, it's a fascinating passage where Hashem tells Moshe that Yeshua is going to be in charge, but he's going to have to stand in front of Elazar, implying that Elazar is going to guide him. However, velo ashkechan itzrich leili Yeshua, and nonetheless, we don't find anywhere that Yeshua ever needed Elazar. Throughout the life of Yeshua, we never find him turning to Elazar for advice, for direction. So Elazar, although he was supposed to have this reward, he was yaran midula, so he went down from his greatness because again he paskin in front of Moshe, his teacher. Amar of Levi called a Mosif Mila Kamei Rabbi. Anyone who answers a word in front of their teacher, Azil Lisho below Vlad, goes to the grave without a child. Okay, this is quite severe. Nemar V'yan Yeshua ben Nun Misheres Moshe b'Bechurav, and this is when Eldad and Medad are experiencing prophecy in the camps, right? And Moshe is told, hey, these two people are sharing prophecies, and Yeshua hears this. So Yeshua, who is Moshe's student, responds, "Vayomer Adoni Moshe Klayim, go and lock them up." Now he's telling his teacher what to do in front of his teacher. So what do you see? So fine. So he passes in front of his Rebbe, 63b1, where it's Samachim on the base. Uchsiv Nun Beno Yeshua Beno, and in Divrei Yamim, where it discusses the lineage of Yeshua, it says his son was Nun, and Nun's son was Yeshua, and then it ends. Yeshua did not have any children, and we suggest it was a punishment. The Gemara suggests it was a punishment for what took place over here. Okay, however, there is a machlokes as to why he was punished with this severe punishment. Upligad Rav Bar Papa. Whereas this view, Rav Levi said he was punished because he paskin in front of his Rebbe. The Mida Keneged Mida, by the way, that the Mefarshim explain, is that a person has a child, the child could be their successor to a large degree, and a person doesn't have that proper respect of teacher to student, they therefore do not deserve to have a possible successor. However, Rav Abba Bar Papa disagrees. Rav Abba Bar Papa lo nenash Yeshua el b'shvil shabita Yisrael laila echad mechaz perav arivya, because he caused the Jewish people to abstain one night from marital relations. Okay, you see the Torah has a great emphasis, and Chazal's great emphasis on the ability for a husband and wife to be together, and this was and Yeshua caused them to abstain for one night, and because of that he was punished. What's the story? Shneimar, it says in the beginning of Yeshua, Yeshua b'Yericho v'Yisei in Avayar. So Yeshua was in the outskirts of Yericho. There's the middle of the siege, and he looks up, and there is an angel standing over him, and he says. Yeshua asked, "Are you with me? Are you?" He wasn't sure. Was it an angel? Was it someone from Canaan? He was trying to figure out what's going on. Vayomer, Yomer, lo, no. Keni starts Hashem atabasi. I am a officer in the army of Hashem. Now I have come. Okay, what are the words "now I have come"? Amar lo. Rav explains. Emesh bital, that the angel was saying as follows. Emesh bitaltem tamid shel bein arbaim. Yesterday, because you were so busy with the siege, you didn't bring the afternoon sacrifice. Right? We have a daily sacrifice, but they were so busy. All the Kohanim and the Leviim and everyone was so busy with the war that they didn't bring the afternoon sacrifice. That was a mistake. The achshav bidaltem talmud Torah, and now at night you didn't learn Torah. In other words, yes, they're waging war during the day, and osek be'mitzvah, pater min mitzvah. When a person's busy doing the mitzvah, they are exempt from mitzvahs. But then at nightfall. The siege stops at night. They're not going anywhere in the night. They should have stopped the siege, and everyone pull out your Gemaras, catch up on the daf, catch up on the Amud, go learn some Torah. Okay, but you didn't. So asks Yoshua al Ez mehen basa, which one did you come for? Was it yesterday's not doing the Tamid, or was it today's non-learning Torah? Amarlo atabasi. I came now. The fact that you didn't learn Torah, and again, look at the high level of expectation. It wasn't, these are people who are waging war, but the second they stop war, right? Some of the most beautiful images out of this past year and a half are these soldiers like standing there, like in these places, pulling out these Gemaras, pulling out to learn. That's what was expected of us. So miyad ve'ilach Yeshua b'laylahu b'sorcha emek. The pasuk says immediately afterwards, Yeshua went that night into the valley. What does it mean into the valley? Teaches that Yeshua went into the profundities of Torah law. He said, everyone, let's go learn. And they spent that night learning Torah all night, and that's what they did. But you see, Ugmiri, where's the bittul of Pirvirivya? So why is it causing everyone to not be, with their spouses? We're not talking about the soldiers. The soldiers anyways were not with their spouses. So what's going on over here? Because we have a tradition, that as long as the Aron and the divine presence are resting in their normal place, because remember, the siege of Yericho involved the Kohanim carrying the Aron. So the Aron is now at the walls of Yericho. And again, we saw Yeshua was surrounding the city of Yericho all night, right? And they didn't, and there was a mistake, right? And that's what the angel came to complain about, was the fact that they were there with the Aron, they were there besieging the city, and they didn't stop the siege at night. That means the Aron was not in its proper place, and whenever that's happening, Asurim B'Tashmita, it is prohibited from having marital relations, and therefore Yeshua, based on his ruling, his direction, telling them, hey, we're going to besiege the city at night, it caused all the regular people who are back at home to not be with their spouses, and because of that, Mida Keneged Mida, we can understand, he prevented them from Pirvirivya, therefore he had no children, and that is the other view in terms of why Yeshua did not have any children. Have a great day.